whereas Canada is founded upon principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law. This is the preamble of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is a document I hold in very, very high regard. But the supremacy of God and the rule of law can only be seen as separate things in modern society with the advent of such documents as the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, where Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. In ancient times, the supremacy of God was seen as promoting the rule of law. Hammurabi's Code, for example, contained an invocation to the gods, but the more famous example, the Mosaic Law, as stated in the Bible, the books of Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy, was based on the rule of the Christian God, by whichever name you call him, and the Judeo-Christian God. I'm sorry, correct myself there. But from whence came this higher being? And the answer lies in the fundamental incompleteness of our scientific knowledge, which Isaac Asimov spoke about in his essay known as The Relativity of Wrong. Imagine two cavemen sitting at a fire with nothing to do. They see a lightning strike nearby, and it ignites a small forest fire. Now, obviously, they don't know the mechanics of lightning, but they still wonder what caused it. And a rough translation into English of what one man might likely have conjectured, lacking knowledge of static electricity and friction and the composition of clouds and outer space, that big men living in the sky send down the bolt to start the fire and cook their dinner. And when the person sitting next to him asks, well, how do they put the fire out? The first man simply says, well, they send down the rains. That's how they put the fire out when they're finished dinner. And the thunder is just a signal of some sort, perhaps a drum to call his family and his friends to eat. And that conjecture eventually gets spread to the people. We would have our first instances of primitive polytheism, as you could call it. Now, obviously, this explanation would be applied to other things when other unexplainable phenomena came up. The big men in the sky, for example, could be aimed for such things as tornadoes or hurricanes, if the people in the area experienced hurricanes, whereas maybe big men underground could be blamed for earthquakes, or maybe even the big men in the sky, who knows. And of course, there might be storms at sea that might be talked about, and, well, that's just the big men under the sea causing the waves. Sounds simple enough, fine and dandy. So, skip ahead a bit. Maybe you've got the same men sitting around, or maybe it's two different men, and one of them asks, well, why are we here? And how do we get here? And the other conjectures, oh, big men up in the sky, well, they send down the lightning bolts, they create the earthquakes. Maybe they made us. Maybe they're, guarding us and watching over us, or, maybe they just got bored, like us. And now, this is in the days before written stories, so you've got these big men who have supposedly created humans. You've got they're sending down lightning bolts, making earthquakes, yada yada yada. And then it gets passed down orally, and it turns from just bigger versions of humans that are more powerful into super powerful, immortal beings that can, govern us and rule us and have the authority to enforce our laws and justify the punishments we lay on others for violating the rules of society. That sound familiar? Yeah. It sounds a lot like a god, or a bunch of gods. And really, when you get into requiring rules for the operation of society, well, these gods are the most logical authority. I mean, people aren't just going to obey the rules because they're rules. So, why not just say, oh, well, the gods want you to do this, otherwise, we can punish you, and if we don't punish you, the gods will punish all of us. And then we get to the cycle of life and death, and someone's going to wonder what happens to us after we die. And it would be very easy to conjecture that consistent wrongdoers would be punished in the afterlife, whereas those who follow the rules in general, maybe, no one's perfect, maybe break a couple rules by accident, but as long as you're repentant or you don't break the rules again, you get a good afterlife. And eventually this good afterlife turns into eternal life, because we don't like death. We don't want to die. We want to live on. As Thunderfoot put it, the eternal afterlife is simply greed. It is our greed. It is our want to live forever. It is not some sort of reward. It's just our want to not die. We can't accept our mortality. Well, humans in general can't. I fully accept that I'm mortal, and I want to live life now, because I only have one. You have one life. Live, as stated in the Satanic Bible. Now, time has passed, we've increased our understanding, reduced these gaps in our knowledge. We don't say lightning is of the big men in the sky anymore, it's electricity, because we know about electricity and how it works. So we're moving from the more incomplete theory of the gods towards our more naturalistic explanations. And this is thanks to our curiosity. If it weren't for curiosity, we wouldn't have science. We wouldn't have such things as Sprite, or, double chocolate cookies, or books like Stephen King's The Bachman books, or Kafka's The Castle, which sits right next to me. We wouldn't have such things as TV, hats, electric fans, sweaters, leather jackets, PS2s, and I could go on pointing around my room at things we wouldn't have. You wouldn't be watching this video if it weren't for science. But people still like to say God did it. There are certain people in this world that still like to blame some of these phenomena on God. Now, I'm sure I don't need to name any names, because I'm quite sure that people reading this video are thinking of guys like Kent Hovind, Ken Ham, poster boy for creationist stupidity, as Thunderfoot calls him. But that explanation is fundamentally intellectually bankrupt. It leaves no reason to continue research or explanation. The nature of God is fundamentally of the gaps in our knowledge. Even today, the nature of personal gnosis is by definition unverifiable, and you ask someone about it, they'll say, well, it's just this experience, I can't really explain it, but I know it probably won't happen again, but the only explanation I can find is this God, or this explanation I've conjectured. And understandable, but it's lazy, and I don't accept that I'm not lazy. I get basically paid to be lazy, but that's beyond the point. It's intellectually lazy, and it's not something we should advocate. I find that the abandonment of this concept of a God would be great for society, because we would have incentive to actually work to explain these things. We'd have this experience and be like, well, what could have caused it? What potential things in my head could have caused it? What around me could have caused it? We could actually study and go into in-depth, instead of just saying, oh, well, it was God, and that's it. And gnosis can apply to any religion. It's not just Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or Taoism or Shinto. It's any religion. Gnosis was what created the Rastafari movement, and where people believe that a former king of Ethiopia is Jesus Christ's second coming, which I don't knock them for. I think the Rastafari movement has some very good beliefs in it, and all power to them, and I do think Bob Marley makes good music. But really, it's lazy. It's quite honestly stupid, and it's a very good method of control by saying, well, God's going to punish you if you don't do this, so do it. And you live life this way and follow my rules, and even though I'm a man, I'm getting these rules from God. How do we know you're getting these rules from God? You could just be making them up, or you could just have gotten into the hallucinogenic drugs a little too much. How do we know that what you're saying is going to come true in the future is actually going to come true? Shit. I just realized I'm actually running up on 10 minutes here, so I'm gonna close this off right now with a little bit and say that, in real conclusion, many of us still refuse to accept that God is nothing more than a construct of the human mind. It is a conjecture, or the multiple gods are multiple conjectures. God was never alive in the first place. Nietzsche even kind of had it wrong. It's a creation. We're not the creation. God is. Created in the order, to create order in the absence of rule of law and to fulfill greed and the want for eternal life rather than finite life. And, well, that's about it. Rate, vote, comment, show your support or lack thereof. I don't really care. I am an advocate of free speech. As I said, I hold the Charter of Rights in very high regard, and the Charter of Rights guarantees the freedom of thought, opinion, belief, and expression. So, go ahead, say what you want. Valid criticism will be noted, and invalid criticism will be refuted. This is Sethar, and I'll see you next time.